My parents spent their whole lives working hard, helping others, and finally retired to enjoy some peace in a quiet neighborhood. But instead of kindness, they were met with judgment. The HOA president, Karen, looked my parents in the eyes and told them they were an embarrassment to community. That was the day I stopped being quiet and started planning my revenge. I've always believed that a neighborhood is more than just streets and houses. It's a living, breathing community, a place where people should look out for each other. At least, that's what I thought before I watched my parents get humiliated by the very people we live beside. We live in a quiet, sunny suburb just outside of town. The kind of place with freshly cut lawns, pastel-colored houses, and neighbors who wave more out of habit than genuine friendliness. It's the kind of neighborhood where people mow their lawns on Saturdays, walk their dogs twice a day, and decorate for every single holiday, even the small ones. After years of working long hours and living in a noisy apartment, I finally bought a house in the so-called peaceful paradise. When my parents retired, I invited them to come live with me. My father was starting to forget little things, and my mother's arthritis made living alone difficult. But they were still vibrant, still full of life. They just needed a home where they could slow down and breathe. And for a while, things were good. My mom found joy in planting flowers in our front yard. She loved sunflowers, bright and bold like her spirit. My father would sit in a lawn chair beside her, holding a cup of steaming tea and watching the birds. He'd wave to joggers passing by, sometimes cracking a dry joke or two. It was sweet, quiet, normal, until Karen showed up. Karen, real name Linda Monroe, was the HOA president and neighborhood dictator. She was in her 50s, with frosted blonde hair, a sharp jawline, and an even sharper tongue. She was the kind of person who seemed to enjoy making others uncomfortable. Always dressed like she was about to fire someone, she carried a clipboard like it was a weapon, constantly patrolling the neighborhood for the tiniest violations. A single weed growing on your lawn? Warning notice. Your garbage bins were out 5 minutes too early? Fine. Your kid left their bike leaning against the garage door? Citation. She wasn't just strict. She was petty. And unfortunately, she had a personal vendetta against anything that didn't fit her perfect little vision of suburbia. It started with subtle glances. When my mom planted a few extra flowers in the yard, Karen stared at them as if they were toxic waste. When my dad hung a wind chime under the porch, Karen flinched like it personally offended her. But I never expected her to cross the line like she did that day. It was a warm Friday afternoon. I was working from home, typing away in my upstairs office, windows open to let in the breeze. Downstairs, I could hear the gentle clinking of gardening tools and my parents chatting. I smiled. That sound brought me peace. It reminded me of simpler times. Then came the knock. It was sharp, cold, deliberate, 3 loud smacks against our front door. I looked out the window and saw Karen standing stiffly on the porch, clutching her clipboard. My mom opened the door. I didn't hear what was said right away, but something in the tone made me freeze. It wasn't the usual, "you violated rule number 7" speech. This was personal, curious, and slightly concerned. I walked halfway down the stairs. From there, I could hear everything. Karen's voice was loud, sharp like broken glass. "This is a family neighborhood, Mrs. Azim, not a retirement village. People have been complaining about how much time you two spend out here. It's making the place look unbalanced." There was a pause. My heart stopped. You're out here every day, watering plants, sitting around, talking to people. It's not a good look. Honestly, some of us are starting to feel uncomfortable. We're trying to maintain a certain image here. I stepped off the stairs and peeked through the screen door. My mother stood frozen, her hand still on the doorknob. Her eyes didn't blink. My father had walked up beside her, holding his gardening gloves. He looked confused at first, then ashamed. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Karen continued, still smiling as if she were offering customer service. "Look, I understand you're tired, but maybe you could spend more time inside or at the back of the house. That way, we can keep the front of the neighborhood looking a bit more modern." I didn't say anything. I didn't scream or slam the door open. I stood there, my jaw clenched, fists tight, stomach burning. My mom nodded politely and closed the door without a word. I expected her to come inside angry, but she didn't. She walked quietly to the kitchen, set her watering can on the counter, and began chopping onions. I watched her from the hallway. She wasn't crying from the onions. My dad sat down on the couch and stared at the floor. For a full 10 minutes, nobody said a word. The silence was heavier than lead. That night, I tried to bring it up at dinner. She had no right to talk to you like that, I said, hoping it would spark something. But my mom forced a smile. It's fine, she whispered. Maybe she's just stressed. You know how some people are. No, I replied, my voice harder than I meant. Some people are mean. She's one of them. My father stirred his tea. It's not worth the trouble. Let it go. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. They had spent their whole lives raising me, sacrificing their own dreams, so I could chase mine. They'd never asked for anything in return, not even thanks. And now, someone like Karen thought she could treat them like they were a stain on the neighborhood? No, absolutely not. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, every word Karen said replaying in my head. The anger in my chest had settled into something colder, calmer, more focused. I realized something. If Karen wanted to enforce the rules, then so could I, but I'd do it better. The next morning, I walked outside with a notepad in hand. I made a point to wave at Karen as she passed in her car. She didn't wave back. I didn't care. I had a mission now. I was going to expose her with the one thing she worshipped most, the HOA rulebook. But not yet. First, I had to be patient, careful, strategic. She thought she could humiliate my parents and get away with it. She was wrong, dead wrong. The day after Karen insulted my parents, the world seemed colder. My mother still watered her garden, but her smile didn't return. My father sat outside like usual, but instead of greeting neighbors, he stared into his teacup, quiet and withdrawn. That front porch, one so full of warmth and welcome, felt violated. I watched them for hours, my stomach churning. They were trying to act like everything was fine, but I could see the difference. Their movements were slower, their expressions guarded, as if they didn't want to be seen. And the worst part? They blamed themselves. All because one woman with a clipboard and a superiority complex decided their presence wasn't modern enough. I knew then that I couldn't let this go. Some people burn hot. They shout, scream, lash out. But me? I burn slow, quiet, ice cold. I don't just retaliate. I plan. And this time, I wasn't planning just to shut Karen up. I was going to dismantle her power from the inside out. Brain the blueprint. I started where she least expected. The HOA bylaws. 87 pages of the most boring, petty, overly complicated nonsense I had ever read. Regulations on lawn height, paint colors, window blinds, mailbox height. Yes, mailbox height. And about 24 other things normal people never think about. But buried in all that garbage were the rules that gave people like Karen their power. Rules she abused. Rules she probably assumed no one else would ever bother to read. She was wrong. I stayed up late reading every page, highlighting sections with keywords like violation, committee approval, finable offense, and suspension. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan, and Karen had a problem. Magnifying glass still to the left, digging into dirt. If Karen was the neighborhood watchdog, then I was about to become the neighborhood bloodhound. The HOA rules weren't just for us. They applied to everyone, including Karen. And once I put on my investigator's cap, it didn't take long to realize that Karen, the queen of code enforcement, was actually a giant hypocrite. Directed violation 1, the jungle yard. Karen's front lawn was immaculate, almost fake-looking, like it had been vacuumed. But her backyard? Not so much. The rules clearly stated that all yards, front and back, must be kept in a clean and maintained condition. I walked around the block and peered through the slats of her backyard fence. What I saw was a mess. Old Halloween decorations, a broken bird bath, a deflated kiddie pool, rusted gardening tools piled under a sheet, an old push mower half swallowed by weeds. I took pictures. High resolution, time-stamped. Even from behind the fence, it was clear. Violation number 1. Direct hit violation 2. The boat. According to HOA Regulation 16.4, no recreational vehicles may be parked in a driveway or visible from the street unless stored in an enclosed structure. Guess what Karen had in her driveway? A 17-foot fishing boat, complete with a dented trailer and faded registration stickers. She tried to cover with a tarp, but that didn't matter. The rules were clear. If it's visible, it's a violation. Click. Picture taken. Direct hit violation 3. The barking menace. Karen had a little dog, a yappy, ankle-biting menace named Princess. Cute name, terrible behavior. According to Section 9.2, animals creating excessive noise that disturbs the peace are subject to fines. Princess barked constantly, at people, at squirrels, at leaves blowing in the wind. I set up a sound-activated recorder just outside our porch. Over a 24-hour period, I captured more than 2 hours of nonstop barking. The decibel levels were through the roof. Violation number 3, secured. Handshake, the allies. At first, I planned to do this alone. But then I remembered something Karen had said. People have been complaining. That was a lie. But it made me wonder, what if she'd done this to other people too? So I asked around. I started with the older couple down the street, the Swansons. Sweet people. They invited me in, poured me iced tea, and confessed that Karen had fined them last winter for having a non-compliant wreath on their door. It was shaped like a snowman. Next was Raj, who lived 2 doors down. Karen had reported him for his culturally disruptive Diwali lights. Lights he'd taken down a day after the celebration, exactly as the rules allowed. Then came the Hensleys. Karen once knocked on their door during their kid's birthday party and demanded the inflatable dinosaur be deflated because it was scaring the other children. What kind of HOA bans dinosaurs? Karen wasn't just petty. She was a bully with a badge. And now I had a neighborhood full of witnesses. Briefcase the binder. Over the next 2 weeks, I compiled everything into a thick black binder. Inside, photographic evidence of all 3 of Karen's violations. Time-stamped sound recordings of her dog. Printed HOA policies with highlighted rule infractions. Written statements from 4 different neighbors. A printed petition signed by 11 residents calling for a formal hearing on Karen's conduct. But the piece de resistance? A letter I drafted to the HOA board requesting a full review of Karen's leadership, citing abuse of authority, targeted harassment, and failure to adhere to community standards. I wasn't just going to defend my parents. I was going to bury Karen under the weight of her own rules. Classical building the calm before the storm. 2 days before the next HOA meeting, I sat on the porch with my father. He was sipping tea, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. My mom was in the garden, humming softly while pulling weeds. They didn't know what I was planning. Did you ever think, I asked, that people could be so cruel over something as silly as a garden? My father took a long sip of tea and didn't look at me when he answered. I've seen people fight over less, he said quietly, but I've also seen what happens when someone finally stands up. I smiled. Good, because that's what I'm about to do. He looked at me then, really looked, and nodded once, slowly. No more words were needed. Enveloped the final touch. The night before the meeting, I printed one last document. It was a formal complaint addressed to the community board. But this one was from my parents, written in their words, expressing how they felt disrespected, humiliated, and unsafe in their own home. It was signed by both of them. I tucked it in the front of the binder. Everything was ready. Karen had spent years playing queen of the cul-de-sac, enforcing the rules on others while ignoring them herself. She thought the clipboard gave her power. But the truth? It was just paper. And now I had more paper. Better, stronger, undeniable. As I placed the binder by the door that night, ready for the meeting, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Not anger, not anxiety. Peace, not the kind my parents had lost, but the kind I was going to bring back, by force if necessary. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. sharp. It was held once a month in the local community hall, a plain, beige building near the playground, with flickering fluorescent lights and coffee that tasted like cardboard. Usually, only a handful of residents showed up, but not this time. Word had spread. By the time I arrived with my parents, the room was nearly full. Folding chairs lined up in crooked rows. People shifting, murmuring, glancing around. My father adjusted his collar nervously. My mother clutched her purse tighter than usual. I placed a black binder on my lap. Karen was already at the front of the room, seated behind a long folding table with the rest of the HOA board. She wore a dark red blazer, her signature clipboard lying in front of her like a sword. Her smile was smug, eyes sharp, already scanning the room for her next victims. She didn't know she was the target tonight. Share the opening act. The meeting began like they all did. A roll call, a half-hearted pledge, and Karen's nasal voice reading off the agenda like she was reading bedtime stories to a room of insomniacs. First on the list, Lot 47's unauthorized fence repaint, she announced, frowning like someone had spit in her soup. I let her have her moment. Let her enjoy the power trip. It wouldn't last long. By item 3, Karen asked, "Any new complaints or community concerns?" I raised my hand. So did 5 other people. Karen blinked. That wasn't normal. She nodded at me first, maybe thinking I'd come complain about someone's garbage cans. I stood, cleared my throat, and said, "Yes, I have a formal complaint regarding an HOA board member who has repeatedly violated community rules while harassing residents and abusing her position." Gasps and murmurs broke out immediately. Karen blinked. Her lips parted slightly, surprised, but trying to keep her face composed. "That's a serious accusation," she said slowly. "Do you have evidence?" "Oh, I do," I said. "It's all here." I walked to the front, placed a binder on the table with a satisfying thump, and flipped it open. Open file folder exhibit A, the hypocrite's backyard. I turned to the first page. A full-color photo of Karen's backyard. The mess, the clutter, the rusted lawn tools buried in weeds. I read directly from bylaws. All yards, front and rear, must be maintained to an acceptable standard of cleanliness and appearance. The board shifted in their seats. I passed the photo down the table. Karen leaned over to see it, her jaw tightening. "I took this 3 days ago," I said. "From the sidewalk, through the fence slats. You can verify the timestamp." No one said a word, not even Karen. Open file folder exhibit B, the boat that broke the rules. Next page, a photo of Karen's 17-foot fishing boat, half covered with a tarp, clearly parked in her driveway. Regulation 16.4. I continued, turning to the highlighted section in the bylaws. No recreational vehicles may be parked in driveways or visible from the street unless in an enclosed structure. This boat has been visible for 2 weeks straight. More murmurs, more glances. One board member, Mr. Harris, gave Karen a pointed look. She adjusted her blazer and cleared her throat. "That's temporary. I'm planning to move it." "Not according to 3 neighbors who say it's been there since last month," I said, flipping to 3 signed witness statements. "And it's not the first time." Open file folder exhibit C, Princess and the Barks. "Exhibit C," I said, inserting a USB stick into the community laptop connected to the overhead projector. Sound evidence. A 30-second audio clip played. Princess, her shrill bark echoing nonstop, over and over again, barking at birds, at cars, at nothing, and it was loud. Even from the speaker, people in the back covered their ears. Recorded between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Peak quiet hours, according to Rule 9.2, I explained, which prohibits animals from creating disruptive or continuous noise. "I wasn't home," Karen tried to say, but someone in the back muttered, "It doesn't matter if you weren't. The dog was." Receipt Exhibit D, the voices of the neighborhood. I turned to the final section of the binder. And perhaps most damning of all, 11 formal complaints from residents who experienced targeted harassment and selective enforcement from Ms. Monroe. I handed over copies of the petition. Each statement detailed a moment of pettiness, cruelty, or hypocrisy. A reef fine, cultural discrimination, children's parties interrupted, neighbors insulted, The list was long, ugly, and familiar. "I also have a signed letter from my parents," I said, holding it up, describing how they were publicly humiliated and intimidated in their own front yard by the person elected to protect the integrity of this community. I placed the letter gently in front of Karen. "That's your legacy." Balance scale, the vote. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. Karen sat frozen, her lips trembling slightly. Her clipboard lay forgotten in front of her, powerless. Then Mr. Harris, a quiet board member who'd never said more than a few words, leaned forward. "I moved to temporarily suspend Ms. Monroe from the HOA board," he said, "effective immediately, pending further review." A second hand shot up. "I second." Karen's face turned pale. "You can't be serious." But they were. The motion passed unanimously. Karen rose from her chair like someone pulled the bones out of her body. She didn't shout, didn't argue. She just picked up her clipboard and walked out. Handshake aftermath. The meeting ended soon after. No one really cared about the last items on the agenda. Neighbors came up to my parents afterward, shaking hands, hugging, apologizing. Some offered to help with the garden. Others just said thank you. My mom cried. My dad smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. Someone offered us cookies. Someone else offered their lawnmower. Karen's hold over the community had crumbled in a single night, not with violence or rage, but with her own weapon, the rule book. And I wasn't even done. Memo post-meeting report. 2 days later, we received a letter from the interim HOA chair. It read, "To the Azim family, on behalf of the entire board, please accept our sincerest apology for the treatment you received. We are committed to rebuilding trust and ensuring that all residents feel respected and safe." They also refunded the Swansons' refine and Raj's Diwali fine. The dinosaur? It was back in the Hensley's yard by Saturday. Light bulb in new order. Karen's suspension turned into a full resignation 3 weeks later. She was replaced by a new president, a soft-spoken woman named Grace who actually listened. The HOA became less of a dictatorship and more of a community. My parents, they're back to sitting on the porch. My mom planted even more flowers. My dad bought a new wind chime. And the best part? No one complains anymore. When you spend weeks planning revenge, imagining every possible outcome, you expect fireworks, applause, a final boss fight with screaming and chaos. But reality? It's quieter, sweeter, simpler. Sometimes victory just feels like breathing easy for the first time in weeks. Some behind small cloud, the calm after the storm. It had been 5 days since the HOA meeting. The night Karen's power cracked like a cheap vase under a steel boot. The neighborhood was quieter now, not just in sound, but in energy, lighter, less tense, like someone had opened a window and let out all the stale air. My parents were different too. My mother had returned to her morning gardening, humming again, sometimes even singing softly in Urdu as she trimmed the roses and deadhead marigolds. My father had returned his routine as well. A thermos of tea, his chair on the porch, and a chess app open on his tablet. For the first time in weeks, he greeted everyone who passed with a smile. And this time, they smiled back. House with garden, a neighborhood transformed. The changes came slowly at first. The very next weekend, a few neighbors who'd stayed quiet during the Karen era came by to talk. One brought a loaf of banana bread. Another brought a basket of herbs from their backyard. They asked about the garden, complimented the wind chime, shared recipes. It wasn't grand. It was real. The Swansons stopped by to say thank you and brought a wreath identical to the one Karen fined them for. "Felt right to hang it again," Mrs. Swanson said with a wink. Raj brought a colorful lantern and offered to help string Diwali lights around the porch later that year. My mom agreed immediately, beaming. And then one day, a small group of kids on bikes paused outside our lawn. One boy said, "I like your grandpa's beard. He looks like a wizard." My dad chuckled for a full minute. That boy was invited for mango juice the next day. Envelope, the final letter. A week after the meeting, we received a thick envelope in the mail. It was from the HOA board, now under interim leadership by Grace, a calm, community-minded woman who has spent most of her years being quietly overshadowed by Karen. Inside the envelope was a formal letter of apology to my parents, a written notice of Karen's official resignation, a copy of new amendments the board planned to vote on, changes to reduce board power abuse and improve community transparency, a handwritten note from Grace herself. We failed to see the damage being done in our name. Thank you for showing us. Your parents deserve more than peace. They deserve our respect. It brought tears to my mom's eyes. That evening, I found the letter framed on the hallway wall next to our family portrait. Collision Karen's exit. Karen didn't take her fall quietly. After her suspension, she had filed a formal objection to the vote, claiming she was set up by a coordinated smear campaign. But her own violations were too clearly documented. The board dismissed the objection. She disappeared after that. No patrols. No clip remarks. No clipboard of doom. Then one day, her house went up for sale. Rumors floated that she was moving to a gated community. Fitting, I thought. My parents never mentioned her name again. Neither did most of the neighborhood. It was like a shadow had passed, and the sun had finally returned. Chair the porch. My parents' front porch, once targeted as too visible, had now become something of a gathering spot, not for big events or block parties, but for little things. Neighbors would wave more often. Kids would say hi and ask about the flowers. One older neighbor asked my dad to teach him how to make chai. It wasn't just about fixing what Karen broke. It was about healing what she'd hidden. Community isn't just about rules. It's about respect. Microphone the unexpected apology. One afternoon, while my dad and I were repotting a hibiscus plant, a car pulled up near our driveway. A woman stepped out. To my surprise, it was Karen's daughter. She looked about my age, dressed casually, nervous but calm. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "I just wanted to say something before we move." I nodded, cautious but open. She continued, "I know what my mom did, and I know she's not going to apologize. She's never been good at admitting when she's wrong. But I'm sorry for all of it. She treated you horribly, treated this whole neighborhood like it was beneath her." My dad looked at her, surprised. My mom stepped out, hearing the last part. Karen's daughter took a deep breath. My mom's always been like this. Controlling. Petty. I think losing this position really hit her hard. But maybe it needed to happen. She looked down. "Anyway, thank you for standing up. Not everyone has the courage." My mom placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." Hibiscus full circle. Life went back to normal, but better than before. My parents felt seen again, respected, accepted. But more than that, I changed. I had always respected my parents, always admired their strength. But after all this, I realized something deeper. They'd faced hate, judgment, exclusion, and still chose kindness. That wasn't weakness. That was power. And I tapped into it, not by screaming, not by throwing punches, but by doing what they always taught me to do. Stand for what's right. Protect what you love. And never, ever, let bullies define your worth. Compass the final lesson. Revenge isn't always a shout. Sometimes it's a binder full of proof and a room full of truth. Sometimes it's watching the person who tried to break your family pack their bags and leave in silence. Sometimes it's sitting on your porch with your parents, watching the sunset, surrounded by flowers, wind chimes, and quiet peace, knowing no one can take it away again. Not anymore.